When you design a garden, you ask the basic questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? We are all daughters and sons of the universe. It's the biggest thing around. In the last 2,000 years, basically two worldviews have dominated. The Christian one, that God created and sustained the universe, and the atheist one, that the earth and all of us are merely complicated machines. But there is a third alternative view that is forming. It is barely 20 years old, and partly it comes from the new sciences of complexity, which hold that most everything is self-organizing along harmonic lines, often such as the spiral. That extends from the smallest things, such as an ammonite and a DNA, to larger things, such as a hurricane, which spirals around, to galaxies and galactic walls. This is a very positive view because it emphasizes creativity, freedom, and self-determination along lines of harmony. This third view is gathering strength and finding expression in all areas of culture, in landscape, in architecture, and all the arts. Because the implications of the new sciences of complexity are so important, my wife Maggie and I decided to use them to speculate on and celebrate the laws of the universe. But the garden, belonging to Maggie's mother Claire, also had an ordinary and practical origin. Maggie wanted to excavate a mosquito-infested swamp and create a place to swim.
We found that an old stream that had been diverted into the big river 100 years ago could be brought back again. So we started by making a water dragon eating a land dragon, and then did this series of lakes, and finally we did some wild nature lakes.
Maggie and I were an inseparable team. We did everything together, designed together, lectured together, partied together. She would talk on Chinese gardens, I on postmodernism.
You know, there's a long, old connection between Dumfriesshire and China in merchant trading. And I wrote a book some years ago on Chinese gardens. Now, Chinese gardens have these beautiful dragon walls in them that go up and down, rather like this one. And we wanted to have a strong wall. And if you go and look at the front end, you'll see the eye of the dragon. My interest in Chinese gardens led me to be very interested in these shapes that already naturally exist in this part of the world, of long curving mounds that are already here. So we were interested in highlighting those and taking the idea of the Chinese qi, you know, which is this energy, vital flow that goes through the landscape, and trying to make it a little bit more conscious and bring it out and show it, how it might flow through the landscape.
I wanted to create a new form of landscape design, one based on the waveforms that unite the atom to the galaxy, radio waves to brain waves, a new poetics. I worked with scientists to find out what were the basic patterns and laws, and wrote to a friend, Paul Davies, the physicist and author of many important books on the new sciences, including The Mind of God. I asked Paul, well, what is on God's mind? What are the 18 or 20 basic laws that run the universe? There were obvious candidates, such as Einstein's famous equation combining energy and matter, E equals mc squared. But we discovered there was room for only 12 on the top of the greenhouse.
So first off up there is Schrodinger's equation. That's the basic equation for quantum physics, and that describes matter at the atomic and subatomic level. All of our knowledge of chemistry, of molecules, of nuclear physics and atomic physics is based on that equation, so it's absolutely fundamental. And next to it is Dirac's equation, and that is basically like Schrodinger's equation, but it applies to particles that are moving close to the speed of light. As we said, it's a relativistic equation. Very famous equation now because that's inscribed in the floor at Westminster Abbey in the plaque that was recently inaugurated in memory of Dirac. Then we move along to the equations of thermodynamics, the first and second laws of thermodynamics. These were known already in the middle of the 19th century, and they really govern everything in the universe. They're all subject to these fundamental laws.
I'm often asked, why should one represent this in a garden anyway? I mean, who gives a damn about these numbers or these equations? And my answer is that, if these are the laws of the universe, according to contemporary science, then they give a grounding to us. In other words, they explain the universe to us.
Yes.
And this drive to know what the universe is the most fundamental drive. It's more basic than the old three eternal things of sex, power, and money.
Right.
In other words, curiosity, desire to know, and to be grounded in the universe is basically the fundamental drive. People really want to relate to the universe. And so what better than for an architecture or a garden to come to terms with that? And so one, is involved in trying to find out what it is. And then, of course, talking to scientists like you, you tell me, or I discover certain things through asking a lot of scientists. And then I have the problem, how do you represent that? How do you translate all of those ideas into interesting architecture and landscape? And that translation gets into a system of visual translation on the one hand, and playing a very delicate game between being real and truthful and honest. Because if it isn't science, and if it isn't really what all of you are telling me, then it's like cheating at poker or cheating at solitaire. You can't
just
do it
add another helix onto the double helix
because it looks good.
Right.
The question we debated was, does the universe have a direction? Does it show purpose? Is it evolving towards greater complexity? Or is it just accidental, random, a result of blind Darwinian forces? Paul and some of the scientists I have worked with believe it has a predisposition to evolve towards greater complexity.
Well, I've always thought that life is not just a chemical freak. You see, basically there are two theories about the origin of life. One is that it's a gigantically improbable accident, just the shuffling of molecules. It's only going to happen just in one little corner of the universe. And if that's so, well, that makes some people feel special, but the way I see it is that life would then have no universal significance at all. It would just be
Accident?
just an accident, literally
Really?
an accident.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you see, life could be something which emerges pretty well automatically as part of the outworkings of the underlying laws of the universe, where the laws incredibly have some sort of inbuilt bias
Well,
towards
but
the emergence of
Einstein
complexity.
said God doesn't play dice, but the answer here is that God does play dice, but loads the dice. Is that?
That's right, loads the dice, and you have to load them fantastically. We're not talking here about, a slight preponderance towards one thing or another. To get the sort of enormous level of complexity that you've got in even the simplest living thing, to get that just by shuffling things around, you've really got to have a very strong directionality, a bias in the way systems evolve. You have to have laws of complexity in which things like life and, I believe, ultimately consciousness emerge as part of that law-like outworking. Because just randomly shuffling things, you go on forever. It's very easy to show that if you just wanted to make even the simplest protein just by shuffling the amino acids at random, you would have many, many more planets or stars than there are in the universe, so you'd have to go on doing it for many, many times the age of the universe before you'd ever get it to happen once, just to make a simple protein. The odds against it are just enormous.
But
So-
you're not saying that we live in a kind of deterministic universe where life and consciousness will emerge all of a sudden because it's programmed in, like predestination?
No, it's always, as we've discussed many times, a mixture of chance and law. And the question is, what is that mix? Is it all chance, as most biologists would say, so it's only going to happen once in the universe? Is it all law in the sense that everything, not just life, but even human beings are biologically and physically pre-programmed? Surely not. it's going to be some middle path.
Our Earth, called Gaia, is the ultimate example of this middle path, which I discussed with Anne Baring, the author and Jungian analyst. I think one of the really exciting things is the shift in thinking of the new paradigm of the smallest level, the medium level, and the largest level. We're beginning to see things as self-organizing rather than directed from above.
I think this is a most tremendously exciting time. To me, it's like breaking through the Iron Curtain or dismantling the Berlin Wall. We're really breaking through to a totally different understanding of what we are, what nature is, and what the cosmos is.
Right.
Do you find that just
yes, I mean,
seems
absolutely, on all levels. I mean, you get it with the atom, which is now seen to be a self-organizing system with a certain kind of integrity. You get it with the Earth as a whole, which self-organizes to protect itself, and then all the way up to the universe. I mean, everything is self-organizing, and that's an incredibly liberating philosophy.
It is. It's something totally new, or perhaps it's something very ancient that we're rediscovering, because long ago there was the idea that everything was related to everything else.
Yes,
and
that's
that there was a
true.
purpose and a consciousness
That's
within
true.
nature,
That's true.
within life.
You know, in 1972, James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis formulated this theory called the Gaia theory. And that said the Earth is actually alive, like a living organism. Boy, did they hit a lot of opposition.
Yes. Well, naturally, it's such a totally different idea, and yet it's such a very ancient idea. The Egyptian and the Sumerian and the Greek civilizations, that was their understanding of life, really, and it made them feel that they were in a relationship.
Gaia, Mother Earth,
Gaia,
though.
Mother
But to go
Earth.
way back to, say, the 4th millennium BC to invent a concept, that's what enraged modern scientists. So what we've done back here is to construct a model of the atom, a model of Gaia, and a model of the universe as a whole. All of them keeping their integrity and directing evolution in a certain way. Let me show you.
Yeah.
Let's have a look.
It's all very fascinating.
And you can see the atom over there, and Gaia itself is the most interesting in a sense because it's our planet Earth.
Yeah, it looks absolutely
And
amazing.
it's shown a kind of self-organizing over 4 billion years. It's the tight coupling, that's why those braids come together, which I've represented by the interaction of 3 things.
Yes, I see.
And that's what keeps life in the best possible conditions. The interaction between those 3 things, in spite of the fact that it's been hit by asteroids several times and totally wiped out, or not totally, of course. It's come back each
It's come
time.
back, yes.
Yes.
And so it's obviously got an intention for maintaining its own life.
That's right.
Perhaps
yes.
far into the future we know nothing about.
Even today, when we're threatening it so much, they say if Gaia doesn't like us, it will get rid of us. In other words,
Yes.
Gaia is this really robust self-organizing system, which, when it is overpolluted, will jump to a new level.
Yes.
And
So in other words, we need Gaia, but Gaia doesn't necessarily need us.
Maggie and I designed the garden to relate us to the cosmos. But why should one want to relate to the cosmos?
I think it goes back, it's something so ancient, it's an instinct that's perhaps more important than any other. We want to know why we're here, we want relationship with the cosmos. And I think from the earliest people who gazed at the stars and who named the constellations and who tried to make relationships between all the orders in creation, this question has always existed.
In 1993, Maggie had a reoccurrence of cancer. Doctors told her she had 2 months to live, but she decided to put up a fight, and she held off the cancer for more than 2 years. There is a peaceful part of the landscape where we used to come alone, where we had planned a wilderness garden. An old ruined castle is hidden in the undergrowth. Trees caught elm disease and crashed down. Instead of clearing them up, we left this riot of death and destruction and planned the area as a kind of heaven and hell, a paradise garden, an Arcadia with death and rebirth at its center. It is supposed to be primeval, the first place on Earth where species evolve in rich profusion. I placed a statue which my sister had sculpted when Maggie was young, where it would become part of this wilderness, and designed a bridge with a seat next to it. I find it impossible to speak about Maggie adequately. and even more impossible not to speak about her. But what can one say that is sufficient to love? Daniel Libeskind, the architect, and I discussed the mysterious way death can lead to life, or, on a cosmic level, the way the vacuum, the void, empty space, has been discovered as a paradox. It is actually full of quantum activity, a full void. So Daniel, this looks into the garden. The area where things had fallen apart and we wanted to create a primeval area, rather the area of death and rebirth. And so I wanted one part of a garden to be really
total wilderness, yeah.
Total wilderness.
But look at the composition of those intertwining. They are like those fractal shapes, which are really in that web. Isn't it beautiful?
Right. Like look at those fractals up at the dead branches.
But they are fractals.
They are
true
fractals. They are
fractals,
true
yeah.
fractals, right.
Very,
You know, one of the things Maggie always wanted was a chair she could lean over. So this is designed to lean way out and,
yeah.
and
Look
cantilever.
through
Cantilever
far
way
down.
out. Yeah.
Very beautiful.
You've certainly dealt with death in a way that most architects avoid. It's not a subject that gets you many commissions if you're,
That's
unless
right.
you're a designer of
Well,
cemeteries.
they are not designed by anyone today.
No, they aren't.
They're industrialized. But it's
Mm.
true, this is a space of emptiness, isn't it? And also fullness,
Yeah.
in a sense that the issue of death is not something you can really decide on.
Well, you've treated it as an unnameable, haven't you? As an
That's right.
unexplainable.
Unexplainable and not containable in the logic given of spaces
Or of words.
or of words
Or of
or
concepts.
of numbers.
Or of numbers.
And that's right.
That's right.
That's right.
It's
So-
something you can't figure out.
You cannot figure it from the outside,
Hmm.
and you have to be inside of it. But we are all inside of it anyway. No.
Did you put at the center of the Jewish Museum a void because it was a mystery, or was it something that was something at the center so you couldn't escape it?
The museum really had no center. The only center it had,
Hmm.
which was not a center, was that cut which ran across all time chronologies, which is
Yeah.
the building itself.
Oh, I
so,
see.
so in a way, the emptiness or the void, or whatever you would call it,
Hmm.
is something that is not on the same track as time. It persists.
Of course, one of the great discoveries of physicists is that the plenum vacuum, or the void, created the universe. And it's something the
Mhm.
mind can't understand, is how can everything come out of nothing?
That's right.
Boggles the mind, doesn't it? The plenum vacuum seethes with foam that actually makes a fractal pattern, like most of nature. And this was a good excuse to design this undulating bridge as a series of fractal planes. About 20 years ago, this new fractal geometry was discovered by Benoit Mandelbrot. In an octagonal gatehouse that Maggie's father rescued from destruction, we made an octagonal fractal with self-similar drawers and movable parts. The fractal shapes continued into the twisted ribs and dome, uniting the space as if it were a growing crystal. Basically, so then the building is an opposition between Renaissance design and contemporary design.
Understanding of
I mean, in a sense, the big difference is that the Renaissance and modern architects believe that in these primary forms, in the Platonic forms, and regular repetitive forms, and the new sciences are showing that nature is based on self-similarity, not self-sameness. Like these, like this, for instance, this is an old wasp nest. If you look at that, it's a fractal form. You see, it's just like a heart, actually. And feel how light it is. Yeah? And all the forms repeat, but never exactly. They're all self-similar. So I was looking for a kind of new geometry.
Well, I know Charles's works, and I know his interest in cosmology, in geometries, in the fractals, in the rebirth of the cosmos through a new understanding of what it. But I think when one comes here, one can drop these stories out. One doesn't need any more narratives because the narrative is actually built into the landscape, and in the way one moves through it. And I think that's the strength of this garden. I think that's the enjoyable. The true enjoyment and the pleasure that the public gets in just meandering through it. Of course, the rest is a story that deepens one's understanding of the consistency of the garden, that every form and every path and every view has been taken into account. It's not an arbitrary jumble of forms, and it's not just a narration from the outside. It has an internal architectural logic.
In part 2, we will look more closely at how similar ideas and the new sciences of complexity are influencing architecture in what is being called the greatest building of the 20th century. Many fields are carrying the same message of the new sciences of complexity. The delicate balance that has to be kept between order and chaos. Our heartbeats and brainwaves have to be kept poised at this juncture, or we die. And the new fractal architecture that is emerging around the world is also based on this delicate balance. Its epitome is Frank Gehry's new Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. It's made up of something like 26 self-similar petals made out of these titanium aluminum frames. Each one is like another one, but not exactly the same. And that's what distinguishes it from normal rectilinear repetitive architecture you see all around you. Frank, when you come to this building from the mountains, it's incredible. It's like an exploding starburst or sunburst in a gray, dark city. And it really pulls you, you know?
Study the plan forms sometimes. Really? They're really interesting. They're flower-like.
I've counted 26 petals, 26 little things, each one reaching for the light, like a phototropic plant, you know, grabbing the light.
It is true.
And they come and they grab the bridge. It's
Right.
extraordinary. They leap out like it's trying to get more air, more light.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I was, from the bridge side, I thought of, since the Basques wanted this tower as a high reader from the center of the city, and I made the tower and the building leap out so that they, with the structure of the bridge, became kind of a portal.
It's like the hide of an armadillo or something, too, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what
Snake,
really interests me.
armadillo.
Snake, yeah.
Fish.
Fish
And now
scales.
the scales, you picked this up in LA, that we're going to use the scales like the fish.
Right, which
So-
get
which get
smaller as they
smaller
go
and
around the
bigger.
corner.
Yeah, we're
and
doing
bigger.
that.
Great.
Well, I see relating to the present, and the present is about movement and airplanes and
Right.
all that stuff moving fast around us,
It makes
which is different, a different world than when Palladio existed, you
Right.
know, where it was sedate and quiet, and you slowly approached on a horse and you
Right.
came up. This is like, I mean, the environment all around us is chaos.
This is the kind of architecture that should be seen in movement, what's known in architecture as the architectural promenade. Everything is moving, all the forms are in movement, and it's a kind of space that really was first thought of by the Bauhaus in the 1920s, a kind of space that would be experienced in time, based on Einstein's theory that space and time were directly connected. That was the modernist idea, never completely realized. It's more realized here in this late 20th century space than probably anywhere else. Right behind me are one of these very strange shapes that people see as a whale or another animal. And you can imagine how hard it is to build one of these shapes and communicate with the contractors and tell them which of the strange shapes they're in. They actually had to give them, the architects had to give them different names. This one's called Zorro, Another one's called Potemkin. Another one's naturally called Fish. But there are about 19 different self-similar shapes, all with a different name, all with a nickname. So you see, architects, in order to communicate these very chaotic fractal forms, have recourse to metaphors that come from our language that we already know. And so the building, in a sense, asks us to reconsider our stereotypes, what we think a building can be. Daniel Libeskind has also been inspired by the nonlinear science of fractals. His Jewish museum, added to the German Museum in Berlin, also makes use of self-similar forms, like this zigzag bolt of lightning. Daniel Libeskind's Jewish Museum in Berlin is one of the most important buildings of the 1990s, along with Frank Gehry's museum in Bilbao. It breaks open architecture into a whole new form of organization and makes use of several ideas coming from the sciences of complexity on how to organize a building without using a central space. What do you see as the organizational paradigm here? Is this a new way of organizing space en route?
I would say by virtue of dealing with the history of Berlin and Jewish history, it is not organized like a classical building where you enter the center, you have all the galleries off the center, you go. You have to find your way in a matrix, which is between different kind of spaces. For example, the central space, which is the space of the void, is continually interrupted, and the public doesn't have a full access into it, only in the underground.
Can you see into it?
You can see, well, let me say, there are 6 of these voids, all along a straight line. The first 2 are accessible from the Jewish religious collections. The middle 2 are totally inaccessible, but you can look at them and from them from within the building. And the last 2, which we can enter later, are accessible, but sort of towards the end of your exhibition routes.
Down the center is an awesome slice of gray concrete. The void, referring to the extinction of 200,000 Berlin Jews, but paradoxically, also a place of silent hope.
This is the line which cuts the building and, of course, reconnects it through the bridges. But as you see, we are in a museum, but this is not really a proper museum space because it's not heated, not air-conditioned. And, of course, it's also empty. It's concrete. Nothing is here on the walls. And it is a space which will simply refer to that which is not or cannot really be displayed in the museum. The rest of the museum around it, of course, has white walls. And
the paradox is that this void is actually not only, in a sense, an absent center, but it actually structurally holds up much of the building.
Exactly.
So what we're looking here is actually, as it were, the foundation
the concrete,
of the
yes,
building,
yes.
Or like a bridge. It's the basic structure.
Exactly.
And you don't experience it that way, do you?
No, because you see it from the outside. Yes.
So this is what you mean when you say it's a completely new paradigm in architecture, because there's no other building that's ever been built that is organized this way.
That's right. The organization here is not classical. The center is really postponed. It is in the center of the building, but of course the building also doesn't have the one final space to which you can get to. The building is continuous across the void. So the only space that continues the building is the space which you don't have as a visitor.
The plenum void, the full vacuum, the empty space in outer space, which cosmologists tell us is full of potential activity, of particles coming into and out of existence every microsecond, with one imbalance actually starting our universe. What a miracle. We spoke in Scotland of the plenum void, in the vacuum, the primeval vacuum, out of which particles and antiparticles come for a very short space, and perhaps the origin of the universe comes from that void. Is there any parallel there between the void as you see it and the void that scientists tell us is behind everything?
Well, without being facile or without making a pretentious comparison between this building and any scientific thought, I think the building is contemporary because it deals with a contemporary orientation and disorientation of visitors. So visitors have to find their way across, for example, the triple root system in the underground, which it is not just given as a ready-made, but falls into place by walking through it and through the light in it.
A new science? A new architecture? When we have the combination of a new knowledge and a new aesthetic, it is very potent because it combines two strong forces: our curiosity, the drive to know new things about the universe, and the drive for a new beauty. I have tried to bring these two desires together in the garden, always working out new languages of design which relate us to recent discoveries. I worked with many artists and craftsmen, such as Alistair Clark and John Gibson, to reinterpret the unfortunate metaphors and images that cut us off from the universe, such as deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. That's why I also work with scientists such as Nancy Lane and Stephen Rose, biologists who help create dynamic interpretations, which are also true. The details of this. Basically, the question is, why do a DNA garden anyway? And my idea was that DNA is, since it's the language of life, and this universal language which underlies everything living as far as we know, although there may be a life that isn't based on DNA, it's something that unifies all of us, all species, all people. It's kind of a lingua franca. And so in a garden which celebrates our relation to the universe, DNA is, of course, really essential as the atom. So what I want to ask you when we get out in the garden is, we have the choice in these pathways. How do we represent the messenger RNA? Mm-hmm. Design is a game of matching one thing to another. Here the growing cell and DNA are matched to edible plants and climbing frames, revealing the fortuitous parallels between the code behind life and what it creates. The microcosm sometimes has the same patterns as the macrocosm.
Area, the central area, and then we have to explain how, in the outside bit in the garden, we're linking up the information made in the nucleus in the form of messenger RNA into protein.
Should we go out into the garden and look at it?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
The reason I think why this garden is particularly splendid is because it's drawing attention to the fact that DNA really is the crucial molecule. The reason that DNA is important is because it carries within it, encoded in its substance, the information that tells us why I am different from Charles or from anybody else, and why I'm a human being rather than a plant or another kind of animal. The sequence of these base sugar phosphates, here's the bases and the sugars and the phosphate, actually are telling us what sort of proteins we're going to make. And those proteins are characteristic of each individual organism. Now, there are many ways in which we are similar to other animals, but each one of us has got certain features which are quite distinct. And the DNA tells us what those features are going to be. And that's why the discovery of DNA, the fact that it carried this information, the fact that it could make copies of itself absolutely perfectly, self-replicating, we say, is why really it's the molecule, not just of the century, but really of the whole universe as far as the living world is concerned.
Yeah, well, that's why you've got your little box hedges growing round the bars as well. And that works. I think that works very well indeed.
Do you think there's a danger of Sood's Corner here, that people would go wild with saying, this is all very ridiculous. Why the hell are you turning a little common kitchen garden
because
into
the point you made
cell? What is
DNA.
this pretentious nonsense,
Centrality.
Stephen? Come on now. You're
No,
always debunking people who do this sort of thing.
No, look, I think it's good fun, and it's quite, it's instructive, it's amusing, it's quite nice to actually sort of make the parallels, and also one can make something which is aesthetically really rather beautiful. I mean, this is extremely handsome structure, however you look at it. And the other thing I like about the whole pattern of the garden is the way in which you can actually read it at lots of different levels. So you've got sort of cells, you've actually got sensors located differentially through the garden. You can then play fun and games with the plants in order to have them actually sort of represent or even exemplify the different features of the senses in the different readers. I think that's splendid.
I've also used Earth structures to exemplify the cosmos as a whole, and as we will see, show the patterns which unite the microcosm to the macrocosm. The universe may be alive, and I discussed this idea with the American cosmologist Lee Smolin. So, Lee, what I had in mind here was having one place in the garden where we'd represent the universe as a whole. And the idea is to represent jumpingness. In other words, my view is that the universe...
fact that the physical laws somehow manifest themselves in things that happen discontinuously.
Absolutely.
There are qualitative differences between different eras.
Absolutely. The idea that it isn't just a smooth, gradual process, but the history of the universe, the 15 billion years, has developed as a series of jumps. In other words, the first part here is the era of energy, and that lasts for a second or two, and then matter spontaneously organizes itself and emerges, and that bends space and time. And then the third era is the era of life, which is represented by that bowl and the dip. And the fourth era is the era of consciousness, which comes out of the ground and leaps over the wall and curves around the house. So basically what I'm saying is that the universe is a self-organizing event which is not a smooth transition, but a series of discontinuities. A fundamental and surprising discovery of our time is the way matter is so active. When dense enough, its gravitational force bends both space and time into strange attractors known as black holes. For a change, the metaphor black hole is fairly good. All matter and light near this dense implosion is sucked in, so it is black. And the force of the implosion creates a tear in space-time, so it is a hole.
The real geometry of a non-rotating black hole, as you go inside the event horizon, becomes like a cylinder, and there's one preferred direction which becomes stretched out, and then the other two directions become squeezed down. So the singularity is actually a line as you approach it.
Given this design, we've got to decide whether it's this way. In other words, in this case, the elements are getting larger as you approach the black hole, or
smaller.
You would go this way then.
Yes.
Smaller.
Yes, I think so.
Actually, it comes down, I think, to these two, that we either compress everything towards the black hole, which is easier to represent.
Yes.
Because actually, as you get smaller, it's easier to compress.
Right.
Or we stretch as you get to the center. This is the stretch. This is the
compression.
So you would go with this one.
Yes.
Okay. It'll be so distorted off there.
I see.
It'll be very distorted up there. Smolin is one of those scientists who believe our universe was born from the black hole of another universe, which implies that the many universes which may exist are lifelike. Here, a black hole shows time being compressed and warped while space is stretched, and it gives birth to a baby universe, the terrace. The amazing thing about our universe is how well tuned it is, how well balanced, and it's partly the parameters, the laws, the constants which balance it. Isn't that right?
Yes, if it's
that
balanced,
to one, that is almost a miraculous balance, and that's just one of many of these balances, isn't it?
Right, and the problem is that they require explanation, because we don't want to just think, oh, our being here is a miracle, and I don't think we want to accept the anthropic principle that somehow takes the miracle as the explanation.
Right.
We want there to be some rational way in which we can understand why it is that the universe chose laws, such that it results in a universe which is not boring, which is not just hydrogen gas uniformly distributed everywhere, but is full of galaxies and stars and has all the chemical complexity that life needs. That's the challenge.
But while it's the point of science and your work to understand that rationally, it's also the point to look at this incredible balance and say, good heavens, it's something that looks as if the universe is a put-up job, as Hoyle said, or as others say. In other words, it may not be, but it's still so finely tuned as if to look so. And that is awesome.
That's what's scary.
That's awesome.
It's awesome, but it's scary.
But it's wonderful. Because if it weren't so well balanced, we wouldn't be talking about it.
No, yes, but what's scary about it is that the feeling that maybe it's a put-up job gets us back to this notion of a universe constructed from the outside by some intelligence. And this is not really about, for us, and this is not really about religion versus science, because that intelligence could be in the form of a god, it could also be in the form of some perfect mathematics, that the Platonic view, I think, is actually very close to the religious view. And either one of them puts the explanation for this extraordinary fact you've been describing outside of the universe. It's something
and you
that
want to put it
the
inside.
Universe. I want to put it inside the
universe.
universe.
And that's one of your great discoveries or inventions, is an explanation for how it could be in the universe.
I don't know if it's a discovery or an invention or a crime, stealing it from the biologist, but it's a move, shall we say, and it's a move out of a certain desperation. Part of why our universe is so good at making black holes is that it has organic chemistry in it, because to make stars massive enough to lead to the formation of black holes, it turns out you have to have clouds which are very, very cold, clouds of gas and dust, which are very, very cold, because only if the gas is very, very cold will it clump enough and accumulate enough matter to become the massive stars that we need. And the refrigerant that cools those clouds, which are called giant molecular clouds, is carbon monoxide and dust, which is made from carbon and from ice, as well as other things. So it turns out that the same organic chemistry on which life is based is what plays a major role in ensuring that our universe does make continually massive stars and therefore makes galaxies. And that's a very interesting thing. It means somehow that the universe has the chemistry that life can take advantage of, that life needs, because the universe already needs that chemistry for its own reproduction.
And are you saying there's a kind of gradual evolution of one universe into the next, like generations of species?
That's what this theory says, yes.
And so would there be a clustering of baby universes one after the other?
Yes, and if there are choices of laws that lead to more easy production of black holes, or more production of black holes, then after a while those proliferate and they overwhelm in numbers the others. So it's a very simple idea.
A simple idea, but it implies that in the future there'll just be, everywhere will be a black hole.
No, because they create the space. Space, an important idea to grasp this is, and it's one of the important ideas in relativity theory, is that space is not something absolute. Space, in Einstein's relativity theory, is an aspect of relationships amongst things. So if you have more, so there's not a fixed amount of space. Space can be created and is created. This accounts for the expansion of the universe.
But you are saying that there's a kind of internal selection for universes creating more black holes.
Well, just by the numbers.
By the numbers?
Just by the numbers. You have some population, and you pick one at random, and is it more likely to have come from one that had many, many progeny, or from one that had just a few progeny? And it's much more likely to have come from one that had many, many progeny.
Well, this is a key idea of yours. So there's a kind of runaway self-selection process, which will create universes with more black holes and more black holes.
If this theory is right.
Well, the other thing is that if all stars end, not all stars, but as massive stars end as black holes and they explode as supernovae, we know that the supernovae actually seed most of the most of the atoms that chemicals are based on. So that without supernovae, you don't get life anyway.
Right.
So these are double birth processes. Now, they not only lead to new baby universes, but they lead to complexity in matter.
Yes,
is that right?
Yes.
So it's a very generative process. You're talking about cosmogenesis on a certain level.
In a certain level, yes. The organic chemistry, the carbon and the oxygen that one needs for these processes come from supernovas.
Right.
By the way, the energy that drives the system also comes to some extent from the supernovas.
Right.
And
so you're getting a lot of order for free here, aren't you?
Yes.
In a way.
Yes, it's Stu Kaufman's term. We're getting a lot of you have a system that fits the classic requirements of what we call self-organized systems. You have a system which is out of thermodynamic equilibrium, which is maintaining itself in that state. there are sources of energy, and that energy is flowing through the system, leading to the creation of organization. And that scenario seems to apply as well to understand the processes in the disks of spiral galaxies as it does to understand ecological processes of the origin of life. To me, that's extraordinary.
So in a
Go ahead.
sense, you're almost putting forward a metaphysics or philosophy that the cosmos is like a living entity.
Yes.
Which is...
But I don't want to say it's alive, but it's like a living entity.
Like a living entity.
Yeah.
And the implications are that we're much more like the cosmos than we thought.
Yes.
When we thought the cosmos was really a dead, inert,
Yes.
passive, materialistic thing. In other words,
Yes.
the cosmos becomes much more like us.
Yes, and yes. And,
So in that sense, it's radical in its philosophical implications.
well, I think to begin with, Darwinism is radical, and we are just in the process of beginning to assimilate Darwinism. And if I can say so, everything I see here is an aspect of this.
As we have seen from the symmetry break terrace, the 4 jumps of the universe culminate in consciousness. When consciousness jumped out of life, it is hard to say. Is an amoeba conscious? Information processing may go all the way down to the electron, but the great leap in organization is into culture. And it is such sentient creatures as the birds, bees, and chimpanzees where traditions, learning, and symbolic languages are passed on. However, no other creature, as far as we know, except us, understands the universe and celebrates it in art, dance, poetry, and such architecture as we have seen in Berlin and Bilbao. Ours is the first generation to know this story back to the first microseconds, the narrative of the universe as a continuously unfolding creative event that includes us in its plot. The question is, who understands the plot? For the longest time, it has been a Christian story of Genesis. And then in the 19th century, it was a Darwinian plot of nature read in tooth and claw, or today, the selfish gene. The problem is, if you believe that nature is a machine, you start polluting it. And then, of course, Gaia gets rid of us. Instead, we have a much more interesting story of cosmogenesis, a story which in some senses is sacred because it has a series of leaps which lead to higher organization, greater sentience, and even us. That is, the universe is actually predisposed in a certain way to produce living, sentient, suffering, celebratory creatures who can reflect back on its surprising jumps and create something you can actually enjoy.